The dog was not guarding the stump because something had died there. He was guarding it because something underneath still wanted to be heard. At 3:17 in the morning, Deputy Caleb Whitaker stood in the rain-dark woods behind Widow Creek Road with one hand wrapped around a leather leash and the other holding a flashlight that kept trembling no matter how hard he tried to steady it. The beam fell across a rotten oak stump, split down the center, black with age, soft with moss, leaning like an old head bowed in prayer. Beside it stood Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat soaked flat against his ribs and amber eyes fixed on the hollow wood as if the whole forest had disappeared except for that one ruined thing. He had been there all night. That was what the caller said. Not wandering. Not barking. Not chasing deer or coyotes through the Tennessee brush. Just standing there, through 4 hours of cold rain, with his nose inches from the stump and his body locked in the kind of stillness Caleb had only seen once before, overseas, when a dog sensed danger before any man understood why. "Come on, boy," Caleb said softly, giving the leash a gentle pull. Ranger did not move. Not an inch. His ears stayed forward. His tail hung low. His chest rose and fell slow, controlled, deliberate. Deputy Owen Miles, 26 and still too young to hide his nerves behind silence, shifted a few feet away with his rain jacket pulled tight around his chin. "Maybe there's a raccoon den under it," he muttered. "Or a possum. My uncle had one get under his porch once and swear it sounded like a ghost." Caleb did not answer. He was listening to the rain tick against dead leaves, the faint buzz of Owen's radio, the creek whispering somewhere down the slope, and beneath all of it, Ranger's breath. Steady. Focused. Certain. The woods smelled of wet bark, red clay, and cold roots. But near the stump, there was something else. Faint. Wrong. A trace of old metal, damp cloth, and earth that had been disturbed long ago and then asked to keep a secret. Caleb crouched slowly. Ranger turned his head just enough to look at him, and in that look was no fear, no confusion, only warning. Then the dog lifted one front paw and placed it against the rotten stump, not scratching, not digging, just pressing there like a hand against a locked door. Caleb felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. "Owen," he said, voice low. "Kill your light." The younger deputy hesitated, then clicked off his flashlight. Darkness folded in. Rain kept falling. For 2 long seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the woods breathing around them. Then Ranger lowered his muzzle to the base of the stump and gave one quiet whine, so thin and human it made Owen stop moving. Caleb leaned closer, holding his breath, and from somewhere beneath the roots came a sound so faint it could have been imagined. One soft tap. Then another. Then silence. Caleb did not move for a moment, because the woods had suddenly become too quiet, the way a room grows quiet after someone says a name no one expected to hear. He kept his eyes on the black opening at the base of the stump, where rainwater slid down through strips of moss and disappeared into the dark soil. Ranger stayed frozen beside him, one paw still pressed to the rotten wood, his body tense but obedient, waiting for Caleb to understand what he had already known for hours. Deputy Owen Miles swallowed hard and stepped closer, all the humor drained from his young face. "Tell me you heard that," he whispered. Caleb lifted one hand, asking for silence. The sound did not come again. Only rain. Only leaves. Only the low rush of Widow Creek moving somewhere below the hill. And still, Caleb felt something in that place, not like a threat, not exactly, but like a memory pushing up through the ground after years of being buried under ordinary days. The call had come from Nora Bell just after midnight, her voice thin over dispatch, shaking so badly the first operator had nearly marked it as confusion. She lived alone in the last white farmhouse on Widow Creek Road, an aging place with blue shutters, a sagging porch, and a small American flag that had hung beside her front door through 12 summers and 12 winters. 3 times in the past month, Nora had called about sounds coming from the woods. Tapping, she had said. Not animal sounds. Not tree branches. Tapping from underground. The first deputy had written it off as pipes from the old mill line. The second had blamed raccoons under fallen timber. The third had told her, kindly but firmly, that grief could make a house feel haunted when night settled too deep. Everyone in Mill Creek knew Nora had been waiting on answers for a long time. Her husband, Daniel Bell, had vanished 12 years earlier, back when the sawmill still ran and the town still smelled of pine dust every morning. Some said he left because money went missing. Some said he could not bear the shame. Some said nothing at all, which in a small Tennessee town often meant they had already decided the worst and dressed it up as politeness. But Nora never believed any of it. She kept his boots by the mudroom door. She kept his coffee mug above the sink. She kept one porch light burning every night as if a man could still find his way home by something as small as a bulb behind yellow glass. Caleb remembered standing in her kitchen 2 hours earlier, rain tapping the windows while she gripped a faded dish towel in both hands. She was 71, small but straight-backed, with silver hair pinned neatly behind her ears and eyes the pale blue of winter sky. "I know what they think," she had said without bitterness. "They think an old woman hears what she wants to hear." Caleb had not answered right away. He had looked down at Ranger, who stood at the kitchen threshold with his nose lifted toward the backwoods, ears forward, every muscle awake. That was when Caleb felt the first tug in his chest, the old Marine instinct he had spent years trying to bury under routine traffic stops and county paperwork. Some warnings did not arrive loud. Some came softly, through a dog refusing to look away. Now, in the rain behind Nora Bell's house, Caleb slowly reached toward the stump, stopping only when Ranger gave a low, careful rumble. Not anger. Not fear. A boundary. Caleb drew his hand back. "All right," he murmured. "We do this your way." Ranger lowered his paw from the wood, circled once around the roots, then sat facing the stump like a sentry guarding a door no human had. Permission to open too quickly. Caleb eased one knee into the wet leaves and let the silence settle around him, because rushing a dog like Ranger was like rushing a storm warning, and Caleb had lived long enough to know that warnings were mercy before they were fear. The German shepherd did not look at Owen, did not look toward Nora's farmhouse glowing faintly through the trees, did not even blink when rain gathered on his lashes and slipped down his dark muzzle. His whole world had narrowed to the stump, the roots, and whatever secret breathed beneath them. Caleb had seen that kind of focus before, 7,000 miles from Tennessee, on a road that had looked empty until it was not. Back then, he had been Staff Sergeant Caleb Whitaker, United States Marine Corps, 32 years old, certain that courage meant moving forward even when the air tasted wrong. His K-9 partner in those days had been a lean shepherd named Boone, older than Ranger, quieter too, with one torn ear and a habit of stopping dead whenever the ground had something to say. One afternoon, under a white sun that burned every shadow flat, Boone had stopped beside a narrow road and refused to move. Caleb remembered the smell of dust, diesel, and hot stone. He remembered a young Marine laughing softly behind him, saying the dog was tired. He remembered the pressure of command, the radio chatter, the need to keep the convoy moving before dusk. He had trusted his own eyes more than Boone's stillness. For 10 seconds, maybe less, he had chosen speed over instinct. Nobody blamed him afterward. Reports were written. Medals were handed out. Words like unfortunate and unavoidable were spoken by men in clean rooms. But Caleb knew better. He knew one ignored signal could echo for years. That was why, when Ranger planted himself beside a rotten stump in the rain and refused an order, Caleb did not pull harder. He listened. Owen watched him with the uneasy patience of a man realizing the older deputy was not being dramatic. "Sir," Owen said quietly, "do you want me to call Sheriff Holbrook?" Caleb kept his eyes on Ranger. "Not yet. First, we confirm what he is telling us." Owen nodded, though he clearly did not understand what that meant. Caleb took off one glove and pressed his bare fingers into the mud near the roots. The earth was cold, soft on top, firmer underneath. Not freshly turned, but not natural either. There was a slight dip around the far side of the stump, a shallow settling in the ground that rainwater should have filled evenly, but did not. Ranger gave one soft breath through his nose. Approval, almost. Caleb shifted 2 inches to the left. Ranger remained still. He shifted 2 inches more. The dog's ears tightened. Caleb stopped. That was the line. There, he whispered. Something under that side. Owen leaned in, shining his light low across the ground. In the pale beam, half hidden under leaves and black moss, a strip of old blue fabric clung to a root like a forgotten ribbon. Caleb did not touch it. Not yet. He only stared at it while the rain tapped the brim of his hat and the past walked quietly up behind him. From the farmhouse porch, Nora Bell's voice trembled through the trees. Deputy? Caleb turned just enough to see her standing under the porch light in a gray sweater, one hand braced against the railing, the other pressed to her chest. Ranger finally looked away from the stump. Just once. He looked at Nora, and his expression softened in a way that made Caleb's throat tighten. Then the dog turned back to the roots and lowered his head, as if the answer beneath that stump did not belong to the county, or the sheriff, or even the law. It belonged to her. Caleb raised one hand toward Nora, not to push her away, but to ask her to stay where the porch light could hold her safe. The woods between them seemed longer than before, stretched by rain and old sorrow, and for a moment the only bright things in the darkness were her kitchen window, Owen's flashlight, and Ranger's amber eyes fixed once more on the roots. Caleb stood slowly, careful not to disturb the blue fabric caught beneath the moss. In law enforcement, there were rules for ground like this. Preserve the scene. Mark the perimeter. Wait for the sheriff. But in Caleb's heart, older rules had already taken over. Trust the dog. Respect the silence. Do not step on what someone waited years to reveal. He reached for his radio and kept his voice low. Sheriff Holbrook, this is Whitaker. I need you at the Bell property on Widow Creek Road. Bring evidence markers and a county tech. We may have a buried compartment under an old stump. Static cracked back first, then Sheriff Grace Holbrook's steady voice. Say again, Caleb. A compartment? Caleb looked at Ranger. The German shepherd had lowered his nose to the ground and was tracing the exposed roots in a careful half-circle, slow enough that each step felt chosen. That is what the dog is telling me, Caleb said. There was a pause on the line. Grace had worked with him long enough not to laugh at that. Hold the area. I am on my way. Owen began stringing yellow tape between 2 young hickory trees and a leaning fence post, his fingers clumsy from cold. Caleb watched the woods beyond him, where the old logging road curved toward the remains of pike timber, closed for nearly a decade but still sitting at the edge of town like a memory nobody had cleaned up. The rain carried its smell tonight. Not fresh sawdust. Not pine resin. Something older. Machine oil sunk into boards. Gasoline that had dried and come back to life in wet air. Rust. Caleb stepped closer to Ranger, stopping just behind the dog's shoulder. The stump itself was larger than it had looked from the trail, nearly 4 feet across, hollow at the center, with bark peeling away in black strips. It should have smelled only of rot and earth. Instead, when the wind shifted, Caleb caught a faint breath of damp canvas, corroded metal, and something sweetly stale, like paper sealed too long in a box. Ranger pressed his nose into a crack near the base and exhaled sharply. Then he did it again. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each time, he looked back at Caleb as if repeating a sentence the man had failed to translate. Caleb crouched and shined his light through the opening. Deep inside the split wood, almost hidden behind a curtain of moss, something reflected a dull silver glint. Not water. Not stone. A nailhead, maybe? Or a latch. Owen saw it too. What is that? He asked. Caleb did not answer. He reached into his pocket for an evidence marker and placed it beside the root where the blue fabric showed. Ranger did not growl this time. He simply stood between Caleb and the stump, breathing hard through his nose, trembling from restraint rather than fear. From the direction of the road, tires hissed over wet gravel. A pair of headlights rolled through the trees and stopped near Nora's driveway. Caleb expected Sheriff Holbrook. Instead, the truck door opened with a soft metallic creak, and Travis Pike stepped into the rain wearing a tan work coat and a smile that arrived too early. "Everything all right out here?" he called, voice easy, friendly, practiced. Ranger turned before Caleb did. The dog's ears lifted. His body went still. Then from deep in his chest came a low warning sound, quiet enough to be called obedience, sharp enough to change the weather around them. Travis Pike walked beneath the trees as though he belonged there more than the rain did, his boots finding the old logging path without hesitation, his tan coat darkening at the shoulders, his gray hair combed back in neat wet lines. He was 58, broad in the chest, with the kind of face small towns trusted because it had been in church bulletins, charity fish fries, county auctions, and high school football fundraisers for as long as anyone could remember. He owned the closed timber yard beyond the creek, or what was left of it, and most people in Mill Creek still called him generous because generosity was easier to remember than questions. Caleb kept one hand loose near Ranger's collar but did not pull him back. The German shepherd stood squarely between Travis and the stump, head low, eyes bright, the warning in his throat steady and controlled. Travis stopped just outside the yellow tape Owen had tied between the trees and lifted both hands with a little laugh. "Easy there, deputy. I heard lights and radios from my place. Thought Nora might have had another scare." The words were polite. Too polished. Too ready. Caleb looked past him toward the road. Pike timber sat almost half a mile away through thick woods and a bend in the creek. No sirens had come. No one had called him. Yet here he was, in the rain, before Sheriff Holbrook, before the county techs, before anyone outside dispatch should have known there was something to see. Owen glanced at Caleb, catching the same wrong note a second late. "Mr. Pike," Caleb said, voice even, "this is an active scene. I need you to stay back." Travis nodded quickly, but his eyes drifted past Caleb to the stump, and for one small moment his friendly expression loosened at the edges. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Then it was gone, covered again by concern. "Of course. I just worry about that ground. Whole slope is unstable from the old drainage line. We used to run runoff from the mill through here years back. Could be sinkholes under those roots. You start digging without knowing what is beneath, somebody could get hurt." Ranger's growl deepened by a single shade. Caleb felt it through the leash like a message traveling up leather. He did not look away from Travis. "Nobody mentioned digging." Rain slid off the brim of Travis's cap. His smile held, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Well, I saw the tape. The lights. Figured you found something." "Did you?" Caleb asked. "Find something out here before?" The woods seemed to lean closer. Owen stopped moving. From the porch, Nora stood in the weak amber glow, her hands folded under her chin as though she were praying without sound. Travis shifted his weight, and a faint scent crossed the wet air, carried from his coat when the wind changed. Machine oil. Old gasoline. Damp canvas. Ranger caught it too. His nose lifted, nostrils working once, twice, 3 times. Then he turned from Travis back to the stump and did something he had not done all night. He placed both front paws against the rotten wood and pushed, not hard enough to break it, just enough to make the hollow center answer with a soft wooden creak. Something inside moved. Not much. A small scrape. A muted slide. Owen's flashlight snapped toward the opening. Caleb saw the dull silver glint again, clearer now, tucked behind the moss like the corner of an old latch. Travis took one step forward before he seemed to realize he had moved. Ranger spun, silent this time, and blocked him. That silence was worse than the growl. Caleb lifted his radio. "Sheriff Holbrook, step it up," he said quietly. "And have dispatch log Travis Pike on scene." Travis's face tightened. "Caleb, you are making this bigger than it is." Caleb looked at the stump, then at Ranger, then at Nora waiting beneath the porch light after 12 years of being told to stop listening. "No," he said. "I think somebody made it smaller than it was for a very long time." At that exact moment, from beneath the roots, the tapping came again. 3 soft knocks. Slow. Clear. And this time, every person in the woods heard it. Sheriff Grace Holbrook arrived with 2 cruisers and the county evidence van, her headlights spreading white across the wet trees until the woods looked less like a hiding place and more like a room that had finally been opened. She stepped out in a dark raincoat, silver hair tucked beneath her hat, her face calm in the way only long service can teach a person to be calm. She took one look at Caleb, one look at Ranger, and then one long look at Travis Pike standing too close to the yellow tape. "Mr. Pike," she said, "Deputy Miles will walk you back to the driveway." Travis gave a short laugh, but it had no warmth left in it. "Sheriff, I am only trying to help." Grace did not raise her voice. "Then help from there." Owen moved beside him, polite but firm, and Travis stepped away slowly, his eyes staying on the stump until the trees swallowed him near the porch light. Caleb watched Ranger as the distance grew between Travis and the scene. The German shepherd did not relax. He only turned back to the roots and lowered his head again, nose working over the mud, the moss, the strip of blue fabric, and the hollow crack where the dull silver glint waited behind darkness. Grace came to Caleb's side. "Tell me what you heard." Caleb wiped rain from his jaw with the back of his wrist. "Tapping under the roots. 3 knocks. Twice now. The dog has been marking the same point since before we arrived." Grace looked toward Nora, who stood wrapped in an old cardigan on the edge of her porch steps, trembling but silent. Then the sheriff nodded to the evidence technician. "Photograph everything before we touch it." Flash after flash lit the stump, the blue fabric, Ranger's wet coat, Caleb's boots sunk in red clay. Nobody spoke much after that. Some places asked for quiet, and every person in those woods seemed to feel it. The technician used a small probe first, sliding it carefully into the softened earth near the roots. At 8 inches, it struck something hollow. Not stone. Not root. Wood. Ranger sat straighter, ears sharp. Caleb felt his own breath slow. The technician marked the spot, then cleared wet leaves by hand until a narrow edge appeared beneath the soil, a board darkened by age but cut too straight to belong to nature. Grace crouched beside it. "Old construction," she murmured. "Somebody built this." Nora made a sound from the porch, small and broken, but Caleb kept his eyes on Ranger. The dog stood, circled once, then went to Nora's side before anyone could stop him. He did not jump. He did not bark. He simply pressed his shoulder against her knees, steadying her as if he knew she was closer to falling than she wanted anyone to see. Nora looked down at him, and with shaking fingers she took a folded handkerchief from her sleeve. It was white cotton, worn soft, with tiny blue flowers stitched in one corner. "Daniel gave me this the spring before he disappeared," she whispered. Ranger lifted his nose to it, inhaled once, then turned immediately toward the stump and gave a low, urgent whine. Caleb felt the whole night shift. "That scent is connected," he said. Grace heard him. So did everyone else. The technician worked slower now, clearing mud from the hidden boards until a small square hatch appeared beneath the roots, sealed with a rusted latch that matched the glint Caleb had seen. When the latch was freed, the tapping came again, not from a living hand, but from inside the chamber where rainwater had found a way in and made something loose swing against metal with every drip. Tap. 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 Grace lifted the hatch with care. A breath of trapped air rose from below, carrying the smell of old paper, damp canvas, and years. Inside was a metal lockbox wrapped in rotted cloth, and on top of it lay a weathered brass tag stamped with a name Caleb could read even through the rain. Daniel Bell. For 12 years, Nora Bell had heard Daniel's name spoken in lowered voices, the way people speak around a wound they do not want to touch. Now that same name lay stamped on a brass tag beneath a rotten stump, washed clean by rain and Ranger's impossible patience. Nobody moved at first. Even Sheriff Holbrook seemed to understand that the first person to reach into that hidden chamber should not do it like a search, but like a prayer. The evidence technician photographed the tag from every angle, then lifted it with gloved fingers and placed it in a clear bag. Nora took one step down from the porch, but her knees nearly gave out, and Ranger leaned harder into her legs until she found her balance. Caleb saw it, and felt something loosen in his chest. The dog had guarded the stump all night, but now he was guarding her. Grace looked toward Caleb. "Open the lockbox here, on camera." The technician set it on a folding evidence table beneath a tarp Owen had stretched between two hickory trees. Rain tapped overhead in a steady rhythm, softer now, as though the storm itself had leaned in to listen. The box was small, no longer than a lunch pail, its corners rusted, its handle wrapped in a strip of blue cloth that matched the fabric caught in the roots. The latch gave way with a tired click. Inside were things that did not belong to a runaway man. A folded photograph of Nora standing beside Daniel in front of the old farmhouse, both of them younger, laughing into sunlight. A wedding band taped to the back of a hardware receipt. 3 handwritten pages sealed in plastic. And beneath them, a pocket ledger filled with dates, initials, payment amounts, and the name of Pike Timber written again and again in Daniel Bell's careful block letters. Caleb watched Sheriff Holbrook's face as she read the first page. Her expression did not change much, but her eyes sharpened. "Daniel was documenting stolen wages," she said quietly. "Equipment sales, false invoices, missing pension funds." Owen looked toward the driveway where Travis stood under deputy watch, his shape blurred by rain and distance. "So he did not take the money." Nora's voice came from the porch. Barely more than breath. "I told them." No anger. No triumph. Just exhaustion. Just 12 years of carrying a truth no one would help her lift. Grace turned another page. There was a letter there, written to Nora but never sent. The ink had faded, yet the words survived. Caleb only saw fragments as Grace read silently. "I found proof. I am going to the county. If something happens, look where the old oak fell." He closed his eyes for a moment. Not because the words were loud, but because they were gentle, and gentleness can hurt when it arrives too late. Ranger suddenly left Nora's side and walked to the evidence table. He did not touch the box. He only sat in front of it, tall and still, his wet ears forward, his eyes on the woods behind Travis Pike. The old timber man was no longer smiling. The friendly mask had slipped, leaving behind a pale, frightened stillness that told Caleb more than any confession could. Sheriff Holbrook gave one quiet order, and 2 deputies guided Travis away from the edge of the scene. He did not protest loudly. He did not have to. His silence had the weight of a door closing. Nora stepped into the rain then, slow and trembling, and Caleb moved to stop her, but Grace shook her head. Some moments did not need permission. Nora came to the table and looked down at the photograph, at the ring, at the handwriting she had probably traced 1,000 times in birthday cards and grocery lists. Her fingers hovered above the plastic evidence bag without touching it. "He tried to come home," she whispered. Ranger rose, crossed to her, and rested his head against her hand. Nora looked down at him, and for the first time that night, her face broke not from fear, but from the terrible mercy of being believed. By sunrise, the rain had thinned into a silver mist, and Widow Creek Road looked washed and weary, as if the night had taken something heavy from it, and left the world unsure how to stand without the weight. County lights still flashed softly near the farmhouse, red and blue moving over wet grass, porch rails, tree trunks, and Nora Bell's face as she sat wrapped in a blanket with Ranger at her feet. The German shepherd had finally lain down. But he did not sleep. His head rested on his paws, his amber eyes tracking every movement around the evidence table, every gloved hand, every bagged page, every careful photograph of the truth Daniel Bell had hidden where only patience, rain, and a loyal nose could find it. Caleb stood a few yards away with Sheriff Holbrook, watching the technician seal the ledger inside a hard case. The contents had already changed the shape of the old story. Daniel had not run from shame. He had not stolen from his neighbors. He had spent his final weeks gathering proof that Pike Timber had cheated workers, erased payments, and blamed the missing money on a quiet man who believed records mattered more than reputation. Caleb looked toward the driveway where Travis Pike sat in the back of a cruiser, his shoulders rounded, his face turned away from the town that would soon learn how easily a smile could hide a lie. There was no shouting now. No dramatic confession. Just rainwater dripping from the oak limbs and the soft sound of Nora breathing through the first morning in 12 years when doubt no longer had a home in her chest. Grace closed her notebook and spoke quietly. This will go to the district attorney by noon. We will reopen Daniel's case officially. Nora looked up, her hands folded around the edge of the blanket. Will people know? Grace's expression softened. They will know he was telling the truth. That was when Nora looked at the evidence case, not with hunger for revenge, but with the stunned tenderness of someone hearing a door unlock from the inside. He always kept receipts, she said. For nails, coffee, tractor parts, even birthday candles. I used to tease him for it. Her smile trembled. He said paper remembers what people forget. Caleb felt those words settle into him. Paper remembers. Dogs remember too. So does the earth, in its own quiet way. For years that stump had rotted in plain sight while people drove past Nora's house and lowered their voices. For years the truth had waited under roots, not dead, not gone, only silent. And somehow Ranger had stood over it through rain and darkness, not because he understood ledgers or names or county records, but because he understood that something beneath that wood did not belong to the ground. Caleb knelt beside him and ran a hand over the wet fur between his ears. Good boy, he whispered. Ranger leaned into the touch once, then rose and walked to Nora. She opened her hand before he reached her, and he placed his muzzle gently into her palm. No one told her to cry. No one told her not to. The first church bell in Mill Creek rang somewhere beyond the trees, clear and small in the morning air, and Nora bowed her head over the dog who had refused to leave. Caleb stood slowly, watching the mist lift from the old oak stump. He did not think justice had arrived all at once. Justice rarely did. It came late, limping through wet woods, carrying rusted metal, faded handwriting, and a dog's stubborn faith. But it had arrived. And for that morning, that was enough. 3 days later, Mill Creek woke beneath a clean blue sky, the kind of sky that made the whole county look gentler than it had any right to look after what had been found in the woods. The rain was gone. Sunlight rested on the Bell farmhouse roof, on the blue shutters, on the porch steps where Nora had placed Daniel's old work boots beside the door for the last time. They were not waiting anymore. They were honoring. Caleb arrived just after 9 in the morning with Ranger sitting upright in the passenger seat of the county truck, his ears cutting sharp against the windshield glow, his sable coat brushed clean but still carrying the faint smell of cedar and wet earth. Nora came out before Caleb could knock. She wore a pale blue dress under a cream sweater, and in her hands she held a framed photograph of Daniel, younger than grief had allowed anyone to remember him, smiling beside a stack of fresh-cut lumber with sawdust on his sleeves and kindness in his eyes. She looked at Ranger first. There he is, she whispered, and the German shepherd stepped forward with a softness that seemed too careful for such a powerful animal. Nora knelt on the porch, one hand on the rail, and Ranger placed his head against her shoulder, as if he had known her for years, as if some part of him had been walking toward this moment long before anyone called dispatch. Caleb stood back and let the silence do what words could not. Across town, Sheriff Holbrook had already released the first official statement. Daniel Bell's name was cleared. The missing funds were tied to hidden accounts and false records. The district attorney was preparing charges. More would come later, in offices, courtrooms, signatures, and sealed envelopes. But here, on this porch, the law felt smaller than Grace. Nora rose slowly and looked toward the tree line beyond the pasture, where the old stump waited beneath caution tape and morning light. I thought answers would feel louder, she said. Caleb followed her gaze. Sometimes they come quiet. She nodded, holding the frame against her heart. He did come home, did he not? Caleb looked down at Ranger, who had turned toward the woods, ears forward but body at peace. Yes, ma'am, he said. He did. That afternoon, Nora walked to the edge of the yard with Caleb and Ranger. She did not go all the way to the stump. She did not need to. At the fence line, she stopped, pressed 2 fingers to her lips, and lifted them toward the trees. The wind moved through the oaks with a sound like pages turning. Ranger sat beside her, tall and still, no longer guarding a secret, only keeping company with the woman who had waited through 12 years of doubt and 1 long night of rain. Caleb watched them from a few feet away, his hand resting lightly on the old dog leash, and thought of Boone, of every warning ignored, every mercy that had tried to arrive before sorrow did. Maybe that was why this felt less like an ending and more like a small repair in the world. A rotten stump had become a doorway. A forgotten tag had become a voice. A police dog who could not explain a thing had told the truth better than any man in town. When Nora finally turned back toward the house, Ranger walked beside her without being asked, matching her slow steps across the grass. At the porch, she paused and rested her hand on his head. "Thank you," she said. Ranger closed his eyes under her touch. Caleb removed his hat as the church bell rang once in the distance, carried over fields, fences, and the quiet road where morning traffic moved on without knowing how much had changed. Some stories do not end with cheering. Some end with a porch light turned off at last, a name restored, and a loyal dog lying at an old woman's feet while the sun warms the place where grief used to sit.